Hello boys and girls, I'm Professor Hans Von Puppet. Welcome to the Roaming Startup Show. Today Bob and Zach visit with Josh Debonis about his new game Meriwether that he is funding on Kickstarter. It's a wonderful game about history and action with just a touch of melancholy. Let's watch.
Thank you, Professor. Another amazing introduction, and welcome everybody to the Roaming Startup Show. With us today is Josh Debonis to talk about his game Meriwether that he's currently funding on Kickstarter. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Bob, as always. Bob, thanks for joining us as well.
Zach, it's great to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So let's dive right on into it. And Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about your project?
Sure. It's a computer role-playing game about the Lewis and Clark expedition. You play as Meriwether Lewis, and the game starts in the President's house in Washington, D.C., and follows the course of the entire expedition to the Pacific and back.
How did you come up with this idea?
I read a book by Stephen Ambrose many years ago called Undaunted Courage, which is about the expedition, and that got me really interested in the topic. So my wife and I spent about 3 weeks traveling along the Lewis and Clark Trail and camping along it, and just seeing all these places that they actually went and meeting so many interesting people along the way. And so after we took that trip, or I guess during that trip, I realized just how great of a game this would be. And as a game designer, everything that I do, I'm always kind of thinking, how I could incorporate it into my work. So it was very clear to me as we were to work well in a game. They're very game-like and can translate into that media very well.
So what made you decide to take the trip? Because I got to be honest, 3 weeks off the beaten path does not sound like a vacation for me.
Sure, yeah. Well, my wife Amanda and I, we like taking road trips. We've taken a few, and we like camping a lot. Mainly, we just knew that it would be a good way to discover things unexpectedly. So it was just a way for us. It was a course for us to follow and see what we would see along the way.
And from that, we've got this concept, which let's go ahead and take a look at the video so that our audience can get a better idea of exactly what we're talking about here.
Hi, I'm Josh Debonis. I'm a game designer and I'm the founder and director of Sortasoft, an indie game studio here in Brooklyn. We're making a game called Meriwether, about the epic journey of the Lewis and Clark expedition. A few years ago, my wife Amanda and I spent 3 weeks camping along the Lewis and Clark Trail. Because of that incredible experience, I knew that the Lewis and Clark expedition would make for a great game, and that a game could tell the story in a whole new way.
So Thomas Jefferson tells you, hey, cross North America for me. Come back and do it all by river.
Like a 19th century version of the road trip.
It sounds like a huge burden, but Lewis wanted to do this his whole life.
You play as Meriwether Lewis, a hunter and soldier, a naturalist, and the expedition's medic. But most importantly, you're the leader of the Corps of Discovery, the colorful cast of characters that you've assembled along with your co-captain, William Clark.
Congress had commissioned Clark as a lieutenant, but Lewis and Clark both agree that they'll tell the men that he's actually a co-captain of the expedition. That means that the Lewis and Clark expedition begins with an audacious lie.
York served as Clark's personal slave since they were boys. His story is one of increasing freedom as they journey into uncharted territory.
And then the dread of losing that freedom once they get back to the United States and things return to normal.
Junior was definitely the best hunter, tracker, and woodsman of the whole Corps. He was often the first to interact with American Indians because he was so skilled at sign language and interpreting.
Sacagawea is young and strong and has an independent personality.
She was fearless, indomitable, resourceful, and even cheerful in the face of hardship. So she represents everything that's good about the core of Discovery. Our whole job is to make sure we create the gameplay that supports these characters so that you fall in love with them as much as we have.
In Lewis mode, you get to explore handcrafted levels that focus on storytelling.
You'll have to alternately diffuse tensions with the Teton Sioux, or portage the Great Falls of Missouri, or decide where to hunker down for the winter. There's not a lot of room for error. The core will live and die based on how well you accomplish these missions.
While in travel mode, you control the entire core and explore procedurally generated levels while managing the resources and men of the expedition.
Travel mode gives you the big picture. How much food do we have? How's the morale of the men? Do we have enough time to finish this leg of the journey today?
How much whiskey do we have?
Do we stop here to make repairs, or do we press on?
What hooks you in travel mode is the discovery. Because it's procedurally generated, even we can't predict what you're going to encounter.
One challenge with designing an historical game is allowing the player choice while telling a story that's already been written. A way we've addressed this is through what we call the facet system. We've identified 5 facets of Lewis's personality: soldier, leader, diplomat, scientist, and melancholy, and we've associated each critical choice in the game with one of these facets.
At every moment he has to make a decision about what kind of person he's going to be. But at the same time, he's hampered by his innate melancholy. It's those human exchanges that makes the whole expedition so compelling.
When you use a facet, its level increases, allowing you to shape Lewis into the type of character that you want to play, while still respecting the history. We've put together an outstanding development team of game designers, programmers, and artists. We've also embedded an acclaimed Lewis and Clark historian to ensure that we're being as authentic as possible every step of the way.
It's not just a story about 33 people who crossed the continent on an adventure of exploration. It's also about all of the people they met and worked with, counseled with, became friends with.
To design the characters, I have to work very closely with the historian to make things super accurate.
So that's our vision for Meriwether, a role-playing game with an innovative conversation system, an exciting and well-researched story and characters, and fun game mechanics to keep you on the edge of your seat as you and the core of Discovery cross North America twice. The reason we're able to make an ambitious game like Meriwether for this amount is that we've already put in countless hours of development time and been awarded grants from Humanities Montana, Humanities Iowa, and the ESA Foundation. Now this is where you come in. We need your help to push us to the end. So take the rewards and figure out which one is right for you. Thanks for
So, how did you design the video?
So the Kickstarter video, initially we got the development team together and just recorded us all talking about the game, our roles on it, and what we thought was interesting about it. Then I edited together a rough cut using that footage, and I put together a story of what we wanted to tell. After we did that, though, I realized that the footage that we initially took was just a little too rough and raw to use in the final format. So once we sort of had a script together, a very loose script together, then I went back and reshot most of the team members, asking them very specific questions about what we knew would work for the video. And then I edited a final version and put in gameplay footage and added sound and music.
Josh, who did the editing for that process? Was that whole process done professionally, or did you guys do it in-house?
I did the editing for it in Premiere. I never really had edited a video before. I had done a couple little things here and there, but I really enjoyed the process, actually. I actually just tonight before this was editing another video for an update that was really fun. And actually I could see that how my skill in editing videos has improved, because I put it together really quick, and it's a much rougher video, and it's a short update video, but I enjoy doing it. I think I might actually do more video editing, after this.
What tools are you using to accomplish the editing that you've done?
Premiere and a little bit of Audacity for the audio.
It came out really well. Got a question
Thanks.
for you. By the way, I'm a backer of the product and the project. I'm really excited to see it. A question I have, looking at it, Meriwether is an interesting character. I'm a big Lewis and Clark fan.
Cool.
It's an interesting character because in life, this is of course arguable because of the fact that the history wasn't really laid out real well about it, but there's a lot of evidence to indicate the guy was manic depressant. And tell me a little bit, I know melancholy is one of his traits that's in the game. Tell me a little bit, and for that matter, there's a period of time that his journal kind of went dark because he fell into depression. How are you putting that into the game?
Sure. Well, so there are these 5 facets of Lewis's personality, and one of them is this Meriwether, it's the melancholy facet. There's 5 facets, and one is the melancholy facet, and that option often relates to that manic depressive side that you're talking about. And sometimes it's thematic that you would choose it, and sometimes when you choose it, it's because you're unable to choose one of the other options. And this, I'm referring generally to dialogue choices. And you might not be able to choose one of the other options because you may not have a high enough skill level in that facet. And there are ways to get around that. There are mechanics to get around it. But sometimes you'll be forced to, or you may choose to choose the melancholy. And when you do that, in addition to having a consequence in the conversation, you get a temporary increase to your melancholy stat, which can prevent you, it can be debilitating in the game. So you won't have the option to do things like talk to certain characters or to journal, for instance, like you were saying. If you do things like observing plants and animals, it can decrease that. So it is a stat in the game. We don't really take a stand as far as how that exactly affected Lewis. A lot of people ask us about after the expedition. Most historians agree that he committed suicide, and they asked us about that. And we don't take a stand in that. That's after the end of the game, and that's not part of what we're addressing. But certainly Jefferson and many of his friends did talk about him having these bouts of melancholy.
Tell us a little bit about your studio and your background in game design.
Sure, yeah. It runs a small studio called Soft. We're in Brooklyn, and we're totally virtual. Most of us work from our homes or from coffee shops, and then we meet up 1 or 2 days either at our apartments, or sometimes we meet at Parsons, where I'm an adjunct. And then we'll get together and brainstorm and critique the work and look at the current builds, and then we'll go our separate ways. And we do a combination of independent games like Meriwether and work-for-hire games for other studios to help pay the bills in the short term. We almost exclusively use Unity these days for development, both for mobile games and for downloadable games like Meriwether. Meriwether is built in Unity.
Tell us a little bit about how it went when you pitched this idea to the staff of the studio.
This idea, I initially pitched it to Carlos Hernandez, who's the writer and another game designer on the project. And we actually don't normally work together. We're working together specifically for this project. And I brought him on because I knew that this was a very narrative-based game, and then I needed a really strong writer, and he is one. He's a game designer, and he is a writer. He writes fiction. He's written a lot of short stories and working on a novel right now. I'm a big fan of his writing. So I brought him on, and he was really into the idea from the start. And so the other people, I guess, I didn't so much pitch it to them as say, this is what I'm working on, and either they were already working with me or I brought on some artists, specifically to work on that project.
Tell us a little bit about some of your past games. What other projects out there does your studio have, and chat a little bit about their production?
Sure. The first thing I'll talk about is I've done a series of 4 games in collaboration with Smashworks and Nick Migros that are, it started as some field games, they're like physical games out in the real world, called Pigeon Pinata Pummel and Pitfall Live at the Tank, and then Killer Queen. And most recently we made a game based on this field game, Killer Queen. It's called Killer Queen Arcade. And it's this big local multiplayer, giant projected screen. It's an arcade game for 12 players that you use NES controllers. And that's sort of the culmination of that work. So unfortunately, it's tough to play the game because it's only played at events. So because it is this big local multiplayer game. So one of our next steps with that actually is to spend a little time trying to figure out a more, like a way to bring it to people to play at home or at least a larger variety of events. I've done a lot of consulting with other studios. I did a lot of work with Game Lab back in the day. Actually, I'm wearing a t-shirt. Let's see. And a lot of other New York studios. One game you might find really interesting that I did some development with another designer, Adam Garamani, called Nimble Strong, which is it's an iPhone game that teaches you bartending. You learn drink recipes playing it, and it was a pretty big hit early in iPhone games, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But it's it's still good and it still runs.
Your project started off really fast with quite a bit of funding up front. Tell us why you think that is and what you did to make sure that you got out of the gates right.
One reason it took off quickly was we're a relatively large team, and so I think it was easy for us to get the word out fairly quickly. We all contacted our networks, and I think there's also been a lot of people that have a vested interest in this game, particularly just been in touch with a lot of people like history buffs and particularly Lewis and Clark buffs. And so early on, some of those people just jumped right into it, and they did some of the big sponsorships they sponsored, which was really helpful and really generous of them. Actually, another reason that really helped us was it was chosen as a staff pick right out of the gate. I think within an hour or two of launching, we noticed it was in staff picks. That was really exciting, and gave us a boost early.
Did you do anything to become a staff pick, or was that just something completely randomized?
No, we didn't even know about it until it appeared. I did see a tweet from somebody from Kickstarter saying that he just he really likes history, and the game just struck a chord with him. So I don't know if that was his doing or he had some influence there. But yeah, actually we don't we haven't heard anything about that.
Josh, the game itself, by the way, as our audience can tell in that video, the art is amazing. Looks great. Tell me, how much game time hours of play are you looking at, and is this a game that can be played multiple times and have a different outcome than what the core of Discovery had?
Sure. For game time, we're shooting for 15 to 20 hours. It's a little difficult to say right now, exactly what that's going to be. A lot of that depends on how we kind of tune some of the procedural levels. Because of these, there are these procedural levels. It's easy to add more or less, but a lot of that has to do with playtesting, just what we think feels right once we get to the final version. As far as replayability, it can be replayed, and you can have different consequences. However, the story is relatively linear. You do follow the same course for the most part, if you do replay it. But what happens and how you do it can certainly change. And then also the travel mode levels, which are the procedural ones. Those are certainly interesting over and over again. And those are the type of levels that you do replay even through a single play of the game. Because if you fail or you're unhappy with how you're doing, then you replay that level, but you play it with a different random seed, so it's it plays differently. I would see it as a game that people who do replay role-playing games would enjoy replaying this, but it's probably not something you'd replay more than once or twice.
It looks like you put a lot of emphasis on the history and the storyline in this project. Is this more of an educational RPG, or are you just targeting the general RPG audience?
We're really targeting the general RPG audience, but there is no doubt that because it has this historical element and we're really are making it authentic, that there is some educational value to it, and we see people doing that. I mean, it's actually been an interesting challenge for us to convey that this game is more than something educational, because people see Lewis and Clark and they instantly assume that, first of all, that it's a game for kids, which it's not really. It's for teenagers and adults, and then they also assume that it's maybe edutainment or something. And so one thing we've done, particularly with the art style and kind of with the branding of the game, is to try and convey that this is a gamer's game, but it just happens to be rooted in history.
Was Lewis and Clark the pinnacle of success, or can the player succeed more than their project did?
Yeah, we're sort of using Lewis and Clark's actual journey as the baseline, and you can do the same or better or worse or different. So yeah, I mean, it's not the best you can do. I mean, that said, Lewis and Clark did do really, really well given the situation. I mean, they were incredibly lucky. Only one member of the expedition died, and that was due to probably appendicitis. So compared to other expeditions of the time, like that's completely amazing. They had many chance encounters that they just lucked out in. So it works for a game in allowing you to do even better than that, because games tend to focus on things that are a little maybe blown out of proportion. And so I think that actually works fairly well.
What made you guys choose Kickstarter instead of the typical business funding, loans through a bank?
We see this game as something that would resonate really well with the Kickstarter community. Partially, we've seen a lot of success with role-playing games and also with indie games, and we see ourselves fitting into both of those genres. And we also knew that it stands out and could generate a lot of press. And so, simultaneously, while we were launching this Kickstarter, we're also ready now to start kind of talking about this to the public and to the press. And so, we knew that publicity would go hand in hand. And we also recently just got some support from the ESA Foundation, so we wanted to kind of play off of that success, and we knew that the timing was right and bring it to the community. We also, just as far as our design process, and my design process in particular, is very much about putting the game in front of people and watching them play it and see what they enjoy. And so we've been very open about our process all along. We have a development blog at meriwethergame.com. You can see all the history of the game, and we're going to continue updating that. And I think Kickstarter is part of that, putting the game out in front of our players.
What made you choose Kickstarter over some of the other crowdfunding sources like Indiegogo?
I like what Indiegogo is doing, but the reason we chose Kickstarter was just because we knew it had the name and the association with games, and that all our friends and fans and colleagues instantly would know what to do at Kickstarter, but they might not know at Indiegogo or something. The all or nothing part was kind of an interesting element for us to think about, because we do have other funding sources. So the number that we have listed for our goal is not the cost of the entire game. It's just it's what we need to raise to make it that much better and to really finish the game and do it in the right way, that it can really have this polish that a commercial product would have. We thought long and hard about how that would come across to Kickstarter audience, because I think people that know a lot about game development know that this budget that we list is not enough for a game that's this ambitious. But it's just we've already put a lot of work into it, and we have this other fund that made it possible to do it for this amount.
So obviously, more funding would definitely help. Tell us a little bit about any scheduled stretch goals, or what happens if we do meet the goal, which I do think you will.
Sure. We haven't officially announced any of the stretch goals yet.
This is a perfect time to do that.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, this is not the official announcement, subject to change, but I would definitely like to talk about some of them. One thing that we want to do is to make, in the game we have something called the Wonder Camera, which is a cabinet of curiosities, which Jefferson, who you study with and live with in the president's house, which is now the White House. Jefferson had a Wonder Camera, it's a collection of just all kinds of interesting artifacts. And so in the game, we have this concept called the Wonder Camera. It's very similar to something like the Codex in Mass Effect. It's the catalog of all of the things that you can discover and encounter in the game. And also it largely echoes some of the journal entries that Lewis made of the plants and animals and the people that they encountered. One thing that we want to do is create a book, an actual book that has all of these elements in it. And so one of the stretch goals would be to create a PDF version of this book that anybody that supports at a certain level would get just downloaded with the game. And then also we'd like to do an actual paper version of the book, which would probably only be for much higher levels that are already getting physical rewards because the shipping costs, we need to mitigate the shipping costs. So it would be with some of the more physical prizes. Another thing that we really want to do, and this is something we wanted to do from the start, but we had to cut just due to scope because it's not crucial to telling the story, but a stretch goal is a perfect way to get it into the game. And that's to add in a level of the game that's a bit of a dream sequence. And we want to do that in order to show some of the things that they thought they might encounter when they went out, but we know now are just not there. So like one of the things that Jefferson thought they would encounter was mammoths, because they had found fossils of mammoths in the eastern United States, and they thought that maybe they still lived out in the west. And so like that's something that they might encounter in the dream. Also these giant ground sloths and a bunch of other kind of crazy things that we know now don't exist and aren't really part of the story, except that they're speculation of what might have happened. So we'd really like to add a level like that, and it can be a really fun level. I think it'll make it stretchable because people want to see that sort of fantastic element. We add that without compromising history. In fact, it will help show the history by showing kind of what the thinking was in early America at the time. And I guess all the other thing is we're thinking maybe that level will probably happen right after Lewis gets shot. He gets shot in a hunting accident, and like during that stretch of the journey, he didn't do a whole lot. So like it's kind of a boring part of the story from Lewis's perspective because he was just laying in the boat with a bullet hole through his butt, basically. So that can kind of fill in that gap. It also fits in with the fact that he was probably delirious at times, and because of the wound, and medicating himself because of it. So yeah, that's a couple of our stretch goals.
Very cool. If you were to give advice to anybody, I know you just started your Kickstarter campaign, but from your experiences so far funding the project, what's one of the things you'd let somebody know or give a little tip to our audience here?
Definitely don't do the Kickstarter too early. Wait until you're ready. I mean, we've been in pre-production with this game for a very long time and in production with the game for a very long time. And even the gameplay in the game and the programming had been, ready for prime time for quite a while now. We had been focusing mostly on prototyping the gameplay. The artwork was not really, up to the same caliber. So I'm glad that, if we had done this a couple months ago and have had this good artwork to show, and even though what we're showing is clearly still a work in progress, there's enough there to make it look good. So I'm glad that we didn't do it a little bit earlier. And then also just be prepared to put a lot of time into promoting it. It's been pretty much a full-time job promoting it since we launched, and it was even more than full-time before we launched, getting the video ready. And just don't underestimate how much work it really is. It's also really fun and really exciting.
Josh, obviously, besides the Kickstarter campaign, how else can our audience find you and your group?
The development blog for the game, which will eventually be the website for the game, is meriwethergame.com. And my company, Sortasoft's website is sortasoft.com. And on Twitter, I'm at Josh Debonis. And that's it.
That's great, Josh. Thanks so much for joining us today. Had a great time chatting with you. We want to wish you the very best success with your project. We know it's going to be great. Like I said, we're backers of it, and we want it to be successful because we can't wait to play it.
Great. Thanks, guys. We're really looking forward to finishing this game and making it really excellent. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Well, that was fun, listening to Josh talk about his game. Thank you for joining us, boys and girls. If you want to help the fellas out with their show, sign up for the VIP list. That way they can send you their free guide on how to crowdfund your project. Tune in next week as we learn more about how to reach your dreams with crowdfunding. Till then, remember, keep dreaming and don't get tied down by any strings.